Smith at the SPARQ Observatory. We've been working on NGC 3628, the Hamburger Galaxy, part of the Leo trio. The last step that we did in Photoshop was use high-pass filters and different blending modes in a hide-all mask to just pull out some detail in the dark dust lane going across the galaxy. In this video, we're going to be looking at blur. And you may be looking at this image and going like, what do you mean blur? Everything looks nice and sharp. Why do I want to blur anything? Well, sometimes, not in this image, but in a lot of images, you can still have a bit of background sky. And you want to make sure that you zoom in on that and take care of that. Well, yes, we already did that. That was the first thing that we did in Photoshop is we went in and used a blur tool. We also desaturated any color in the background sky, and we also darkened the background sky a bit. And at this point, what I'm really looking at, what I really want to focus on is just the galaxy and also bright stars for different reasons. There may be some artificial lines in the galaxy that are separating different areas of the galaxy from one another. That can be a result of doing some processing in PixInsight. And with the stars, we can see a couple of bright stars. There's a yellow-orange one, red one up here to the upper right of the galaxy that has some diffraction spikes from the spider cage holding the secondary mirror. We have the same thing down to the bottom left of the galaxy, a hotter blue star. And if you look at those diffraction spikes, which we will in a minute, you'll see that we might want to use some blurring in those spikes. But first we're going to look at the galaxy. So what I'm interested in is there any area in the galaxy where there's some processing that might have caused some sort of artificial separation? And I'm seeing a little bit up here. This looks like it, that it may not be that. I might want to blur that a little bit, blur this edge. And especially here, this edge seems like it's a little bit artificial to me. Obviously, you don't have to do this. This is to taste, or also you may just decide that maybe this is really what it's supposed to look like and you want to leave it there. But we're going to go ahead and I want to show you how to do this regardless. So we're going to go up under Window, Layers. And we've got our background, and as always we want to make a background copy to keep everything protected, and we're going to make a copy of that, and this is what we're going to use for our blur. So I'm going to relabel this blur Gaussian 1.5. And the reason I'm naming it that is because it is going to be a blur, and there are different modes of blur in Photoshop. The one that we're going to be using is a Gaussian blur, and I have the pixel value set at 1.5. Now I might change that. I might make it higher or a bit lower depending on what the results are and how it looks when I'm working in the blur. But for right now, this is nothing more than a background copy. All I've done is renamed it. I haven't blurred anything. So I've got this layer selected, blur Gaussian 1.5, and now I've actually got to make it a blur Gaussian 1.5. And we're going to go up under Filter, and we're going to go under Blur. And here are all the different blurs that Photoshop offers. We're going to use Gaussian blur. And if we set this at 1.5, we're going to use the preview window, the little window in the tool here, to look at the galaxy. And right now I need to zoom out a bit and actually find where the galaxy is. There it is. And there's the galaxy, and then we can zoom in. By the way, when we have the preview checked, whatever we do here is also going to show up in the big image, but it doesn't mean that we have applied anything yet. So if I turn the preview off, especially here's the main part of the galaxy here, if I turn the preview off, you can see more detail as soon as I put the blur on. Okay, but I'm not, your eye is drawn to the dust lane, but I'm not worried about the dust lane. I'm worried about this demarcation down here. So if I look at that and turn the blur on, I can still see it a little bit. It's not that bad, but I might want to increase the pixel, the radius here, just a bit. So I'm going to make it 1.7. You don't want to go too high. The higher you go with the radius on the pixel setting, the more blur is going to be imparted to your image. So let me just show you how this can go. I've got it at 38. We can see in the preview here, if I were to apply this to the image, there we go. So we have really blurred it out. So generally for me, I like to have a very small radius between 1.5 to 2.5 maybe. So I'm going to set this at 1.7. There's our preview, and yes, it did wreck the core of the galaxy, but I don't care, the dust lane of the galaxy. I'm not going to be blurring that. I'm going to make a mask so that I have control over what I am blurring. So I'm going to click OK. Now we have this entire layer is blurred at 1.5. If I check this layer off, you can see that we're back to the images, just to the background of the background copy. So the last thing to do here before we start actually working on that line is change this to a hide all mask. We go up under layer, layer mask, hide all, and now because everything is hidden, in order to get to the blur layer, we have to punch through the background of the background copy using the paintbrush. And again, all I care about right now is just this one line. I'm going over to the paintbrush. And again, you can adjust the size of the brush by using the brackets on your keyboard. I think that's pretty good, and maybe a little bit, yeah, right about in there is good. And I'm going to just start painting along this line. And we'll go ahead and come down, and you can really see where I have blurred and where I haven't. So from where my paintbrush is up to the right, I have blurred, and down to the up to the left I blurred, and down to the right I haven't. And remember also that you can also control the blurring by coming up here to the opacity and changing the opacity. I generally like to start at 100% and see if it's too much, but if I have a small pixel size, I'm not too worried about that. So we're coming down here, we're blurring this line again, just by painting over the area that I want to change. And especially all this stuff down here kind of doesn't look all that natural. So there we go. All right, so that takes care of that. I may want to go up to the upper edge of the galaxy up here. Again, we kind of almost have the same problem. And so I'm just going to come along here, maybe blur this out a little bit. This looks like a little bit pixelated along this edge, and just kind of paint along here. And yes, there are some purists among you who may say, well, what if that's really there? Well, okay, then you are free to leave it. I don't see anything too bad here. I'm not sure about this in here. This looks like it's a bit artificial. And just right there, just to do that. Okay, so that takes care of the galaxy. That was my only concern in the galaxy. I didn't see any noise. I don't see any noise that needs to be addressed in this edge, the edge of the galaxy up to the upper left. Neither do I see anything in the galaxy down to the lower right that looks like excessive noise. Sometimes you can still get pixelation in these areas. But we did pass by the other problem area, which are, for me, these stars that have these diffraction spikes. And I also see a little artifact, and I must have missed that when we were doing the pixel fix. But we can fix that also just by using the blur. Now, this is too large of a paintbrush to do these spikes, so I'm going to make it smaller. We want to make it just a hair bigger than what the spike is. And I'm going to just draw along the spike and even those out. Draw along the spike, even those out. Same thing here. Remember, these spikes are artificial, so I do think they look nice in a photograph, but we want to kind of deal with it. Also, the edge of this star kind of looks a little too pronounced here, so I'm going to kind of get all along here, this edge, and kind of smooth that out a little bit. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to do is get rid of this guy. Now you can use the healing brush, but since we're already in blur, we can do that too. We can just blur this, and what's going to happen is that black background is going to kind of get mixed, and it's way overwhelmed by everything else that's around it. So we're not actually spreading black pixels around, we're actually making this black pixels lighter. A little bit there to get rid of. And again, if I turn the layer off, back on, off, and I kind of like that softer thing. So we're going to do one more star. We have two bright stars in here. There's a hot blue star over this direction somewhere. Might have gone a bit too far. There she is. And same thing. I'm going to draw on the spikes directly into the star. Draw on the spike. Draw on the spike. Draw on the spike. And again, this is a bit of a pronounced edge, so I'm going to smooth that out. Just drawing with my paintbrush right on the edge there, so it's bringing in pixels from the outside as well as pixels from the inside of that, and smooth that out so it's not so bad. Now, these are really small details that probably most people wouldn't notice, but I find it interesting to go deep into the photo and see what kinds of odd things can happen. So that is that. I've taken care of what I thought was an artificial demarcation in the galaxy on both edges, and dealt with the diffraction spikes from the secondary mirror spider cage. And the last thing we have to do is, we don't need to save the image with all these layers. You can save it as a Photoshop file format with the layers and just come back and work on it some other time. But I'm going to go ahead and under layer, flatten image, and now we have one layer. And for SPARQ students, we're going to save this as the next step in our folder number 11, which is our Photoshop folder. And we're going to save this as 4, and we can just call it blur. We kind of know what we did there, and we're done with that. Click save, and okay, and we are good. And we have only one step left to do, which is to see if we can pull out some color in this image, and I'm already very optimistic that we can. I see a lot of beautiful colors with the stars, and there's some color in the galaxy that I'm sure we can bring out. Thanks for joining me again. This is Steve Smith at the SPARQ Observatory, and we'll see you in the next video.